I've been chasing things like this. This is a fish fossil with plant material around it. You're going to see some things like this. It's hard to recognize, but that's actually a stingray. We're going to talk about that. And if we have time, we're going to talk about this, because that's part of where I've been and what I've been doing. So where I went out in the western part of USA, out to Wyoming, and was digging fossils in this Green River Formation. It's quite large. It covers 3 states, 65,000 square kilometers, and it's fairly significant formation. Ruby and I had been there 8 years ago and dug fish fossils and just couldn't wait to go back. So let me tell you a little bit about the Green River Formation. This was written by a Dr. H.M. King, and they consider it a fossil lake, as you'll see, that they say was formed over a 5 million year period. This is a quote from him. He says, "The Green River Formation contains a story of what the environment was like about 50 million years ago. Streams draining the steep mountains carried large amounts of sand, silt, mud, and dissolved minerals into lakes that occupied the Intermountain Basin. Over time, the sand, silt, and mud began filling the lakes, and the dissolved minerals altered the chemistry of the lake waters." And the question is that story, because it is a story, is that story true and supported by what we see? Well, in this Green River Formation, you find all kinds of things. You find birds, you find plants, alligators, lots of plants, and lots of fish. It's what it's most known for. And some of these are, either in the act of eating or have just been squashed and vomited out what they just ate. So we started out there, a 3-day trip in our RV, and this is how our trip started. 3 days in a row, 3 days in a row of in mechanic shops and being towed. There's nothing like driving down our interstates at 70 miles an hour in an RV when all power is lost and you don't even have blinkers or emergency lights, and all you can do is coast off the interstate. But we never gave up. We had 2 other ladies from our church that joined us. And look, we had prayed about this trip and prayed about it. And we were just convinced God wanted us to do it. So we weren't going to let breakdowns 3 days in a row, 4 different mechanics, stop us. Instead, we loaded up everything that we had into a little trailer, U-Haul trailer, and kept going. Left the RV with the mechanic, thinking may be there forever. But we got out to Wyoming and made it to the quarry. And this is the sign as it welcomes you to this quarry. It says, "Prepare to descend 52 million years into the past." Here's the quarry. Now, Ruby and I had been here, like I said, 8 years ago. And this is the same quarry. The difference is now they don't let you go pick the blocks off the side of the quarry yourselves. Instead, they have a big excavator that picks up the blocks, lines them out in lines, and each day they let you split one of these lines. And that was a lot of fun before, but this time we had 2 ladies with us that they've never dug fossils before in their lives. So I wasn't real sure about how they would do, but they started us off with a little talk about how this all formed. Basically the same story that we read about before. Now, keep in mind, this is a 600-meter thick deposit, and it's a couple of 100 yards wide, lengthwise, of this rock wall, and it's probably moved back a good 20 feet in 8 years, not very far. So it's called the split fish. Some geologists call it the sandwich layer, and it's because it's got these fine layers, these very thin layers in the limestone that let you split it. We're going to look at how that's done. You can start off by splitting off a big block like this, or you get it down to finer and finer layers. And we're going to show you how that works. Joe, you want to play this video?
Let me get my scissors here. yes.
Watch the ankles.
Watch your ankle.
End of the hammers. Twist it.
I got a good picture of the
Oh, we got a little tiny fish.
Not much.
No.
And shall we play this other one as well? Yeah.
Well, the other one of me splitting some material that we brought back with us. By the way, before you do, you can look in the background. You see the big plant, the big stick that we got from there, from the trip. Go ahead and play it. So we just made that big split. We didn't find anything. So I thought I'd make another little split. And I split this one. And we have a nice fish.
Ah, good.
Almost a complete fish. So you never know. You just got to keep splitting and looking. So these are just some of the pictures of the various fish that we find. Now, you know, these are mostly, well, we'll talk about this. They're identical to sardines and herrings that we have today, but they consider them to be extinct freshwater fish. But like I said, anatomically, they're identical to what we have today. We found lots of them. We found over 100 of these. But the very first thing found was the one I held up a while ago, which was a stingray by one of the ladies who's never dug fossils before, never split for rocks for fish. And very first thing she finds, and the young guy who's working there is the guides. One of them said that I think it took him 3 years to find his first stingray. And so this was amazing. So she spent the next hour looking for the rest of this stingray, but didn't find it. Then at the end, we had it for a 4-hour period. Then you're allowed to go and cut the rocks up. But we took everything back with us that we could haul back so we could prep them. Here's, you can see on the left, just a picture of what we brought back with us. Lots and lots of fish. And we brought back some big plates that had lots of fish on them, which is going to make for some nice displays. But once you get them back, you have to prep them. Trying to take off this very paper thin layer without taking the fossilized material off of it. And this layer is supposedly laid down over 1 year. That's 1 year's worth of deposition. Remember, it was 0.2 of a millimeter thick per year of deposition. Now, does that make sense? That this fish would lay there and not decompose that slow rate of deposition. And yet I can take that layer off and see the very intricacies of the fish. Here on the, I'm showing you here is a picture on the right. That's from the National Monument, which is just pretty much right behind the quarry. And just a display of all the different types of fish that they find. And we found many of those. We didn't find any quite as nice as those big ones. But this formation, it's known for having some of the highest concentrations of fish of anywhere in the world. And what's interesting about them is that they are so exceptionally well preserved that they not only have soft tissue, but you can tell even what the contents are, and for many of them as to what they ate. So let's talk about this story. Like I said, the most common fish are the Nidia and the Diplomitis, and those are the same as the modern day herring and sardines. And like I said, the first find that we made was a stingray, which is almost exclusively saltwater, and it's buried with land plants. I showed you the large land plant. We found a lot of other plants, some fish with land plants right there in the same fossil. And then you've got the fact that this 600-meter thick deposit is supposed to have been laid down by the erosion of the surrounding mountains. Well, having looked at lakes and even nuclear bomb craters and been able to characterize their different deposition events because of the layering, I can tell you this deposit does not fit that explanation because all these layers, it's 600 meters thick, and yet that's over a 5 million year period. That comes out to less, well, right at 1/10 of a millimeter per year. Wikipedia will say it's just a little bit below 2/10 of a millimeter per year. Well, even at that rate, that's 5 years to get 1 millimeter of deposition. But if it's a
If I just jump in quickly there, Glenn, just to reiterate the fact that this is the first point that Professor Derek Ager pointed out in his book on the nature of the stratigraphic record, which is basically saying that when you take your thickness of deposit and you effectively divide it by the time that it supposedly took to lay down, right? So 600 meters in 5 million years, you can do this all over the world. John first did it with me for Stanton, which is 20 meters, which is, what's that, 65-ish feet, over 10 million years. You end up with, 0.002 millimeters per year. And the point that Derek Ager made was that when you try and calculate the rates of sedimentation, the results are usually ludicrous. Right now, that's a quote from him himself, right? So you really are dealing with something that has to be different from your standard story of this is a slow, gradual deposit at a base. With chalk cliffs, it's supposed to be, bottom of the sea, calcareous ooze. This is supposed to be bottom of a lake, slowly building up. Your, Jurassic Solnhofen is supposed to be a shallow sea that slowly builds up over vast periods of time. And if you really take that assumption, and the beauty of what Professor Derek Ager was doing is that you don't have to deal with radiometric dates, you don't have to deal with carbon dating, you don't have to deal with any of these sort of, more technical things. You're simply doing a very simple mathematical equation. And you're putting two pieces of data into a simple division equation. And the two pieces of data that you're putting in, one is absolute. You can go and physically see and measure thickness of deposits. The other one is the arbitrary measurement, if you like. It's the dates. And you get ludicrous results every single time. And you were the one who first really took me through with that, John. So, and you can apply this to all sorts, including like the polystrate trees as well.
I'll throw something in there too, Joe. Glenn mentioned the fact that these are herrings, and if you come to Australia, you'll still see them living. We have our Murray River freshwater herring, and you say, hey, this is a fish that I find in the Green River beds. So no matter how old you put on the Green River Formation, you have living fossils. The bugbear of all evolutionists, and it's time they admitted it. And so we used to say, stuff it in your pipe and smoke it. It's the end of your argument. So when you look at that, the Green River Formation is excellent examples of rapidly deposited, not slowly deposited, but buried living fossils. Thanks, Glenn. Back to you.
Well, y'all jumped ahead because I was going to get to that very thing. Right here, I was just going to make the point that if this was a lake and it was being filled by erosion from the mountains around it, what would you see? Well, there you would have a closed system. You would get these alternating layers of very coarse gravel, then to the coarse sands, then to the fine sands, then to the silts, to the clays, and then you would get another deposition event. But in SID, just what you see here, each of these little layers, they're indistinguishable from a textural standpoint and a chemistry standpoint. So they give evidence of deposition by laterally flowing water. And this is in limestone, so laterally flowing saltwater deposits. And like I said, having characterized deposition events in a closed lake systems, I can tell you this formation does not represent that. It represents this laterally flowing sediment deposition. And then I was just going to quote from some secular scientists that says preservation's best when certain conditions are met. Yes, there are. And it has to be shortly after the organisms die. For one thing, the organic remains should be covered quickly, yes, by sediment to remove the threat of post-mortem predation. oxygen accelerates the microbial activity, and it can distort and damage the remains. Remember, these are very well meticulously preserved, so they haven't had the microbial activity taking place. And then others say, it's got to be in anoxic conditions. That's a lack of oxygen. It's got to be rapid burial of these live organisms. And yet here's these layers, and you can see how thin they are. That's like a paper. And that's what I was having to take off of these. And as Joe talked about, here's the mathematics. So for just these small fish, if you figure that they're 25 millimeters thick, well, that's 208 years that it has to lay there without any microbial activity. And that's just to cover it. Then you've got to bury it deep enough to squash it flat and for it to be anoxic and not decompose. So you're talking about hundreds of years. And then you've got alligators, which you've got to be talking about thousands of years just to get the first layer to cover it. And as he said, that just makes no sense. And then when you see all of these, it's got to be a massive mass mortality event. It's got to be a rapid dying event. Well, what does that sound like? So this is what we observe. And my question is, what could cause these mass mortality events that occur all over the world? Joe mentioned the one in Germany that's just identical to this. And it's a mass mortality all over the world of creatures that include salt and fresh water, plus land and animals and land plants, buried so rapidly that they're not scavenged, they're not decomposed, buried deep enough in oxygen-depleted sediment to squash them flat and then turn to limestone. So what would cause such an event?